Hello, my name is Peter Alvarado, and I am the Director of Regulation and Oversight at the Office of Lottery and Gaming. As part of my responsibilities, I process sports wagering applications and make final recommendations to the Executive Director. As such, I reviewed your application and recommended approval. This is no small accomplishment, as we have high standards on licensing. Accordingly, I congratulate you on your successful completion of the application process. One of my other duties at the OLG is the implementation of its anti-money laundering program, a program required by law that ensures that we have internal controls to guard against our sports betting operations being used to launder money or other illicit activities. This brings me to why we are here today. Today's training will cover anti-money laundering and your responsibilities as a sales agent for the lottery. Before I move on to my training presentation, I just want to give you a little brief snapshot of my background. Okay, prior to joining the OLG in January of 2020, I was the head of compliance at a large tribal casino in California. And then prior to that, I worked in consulting on anti-money laundering matters, on casinos, banks. I also have experience working in federal law enforcement. I was a special agent for the IRS Criminal Division for over 20 years. I also have experience working as a regulator. I was the deputy director at FinCEN, which is the agency that administers the anti-money laundering laws and regulations in the United States. Now, I'm giving you this information for no other reason, just to let you know that I have experience in these matters. This has been most of what I've spent most of my adult career working on, so this is not something new to me, okay? And with that, bear with me as I change my display so you can view my presentation. Okay, just be a minute. Okay, so hopefully it's switched over right, and now you see the screen that says anti-money laundering, uh, retail training. And the date on it is March 14, 2023. That's just the date I recorded this presentation. Okay, so let's go over the agenda, what we're gonna cover. Okay. Now, as I move through the slides, I'm sometimes going to read the slide, and other times I'm just going to summarize what's on the screen because maybe it's a lot of data on there, and I just want to simplify it a little bit for you. Okay. But if you wish to have a copy of the slide presentation, just let someone know when you come in for your in-person training that you want a copy of it. I might be there, I might be present, but if I'm not, just let someone know, and they'll give you a copy of the presentation. Okay. Excuse me. So the agenda, the purpose of the training, we'll cover that. The Bank Secrecy Act regulatory requirements, that's very important. We'll cover that. Suspicious activity reporting requirements, reporting unusual activity, cash transactions, unauthorized disclosures, and recent enforcement actions. So you'll see that a lot of what we're covering today has to do with identifying and reporting suspicious activity. Okay. So here's the purpose of the training. Okay, as a Gambit retailer, you are now part of the DC Lottery's sportsbook. So under federal law, sportsbooks, same as casinos, are required to provide anti-money laundering training to its employees that are involved in gambling activities. So your establishment, your store where we're going to put in the kiosks to allow sports betting, that is gambling. You're involved in it now. And so you have to receive this training. And the training must include the identification and reporting of suspicious activity, which we'll go into in depth in this presentation. It'll also cover the cash transaction requirements, because now you're going to have people coming in and betting with cash. And if they reach certain levels, we have reporting requirements that we have to do on the sports betting side. Okay. And I also want to let you know that today's training is an annual requirement. And so this is not just one time because you're being licensed. No, it's going to be an annual. There'll be another presentation to you a year from now. Okay. Now, don't be afraid. I'm not going to go over all of what you see on the screen because I know it's a lot. But the reason I put this there is I want you to have an idea that of what is involved in having an anti-money laundering. program. There are, it's a bit complex. Up at the left, you see the system of internal controls. That's just our policies, our procedures, our processes that we have in order to execute the program. Okay, over on the right, independent testing, we have to have somebody independent of us come in and test the program to ensure that it's operating as intended and that it's effective. Down at the bottom left, BSA officers. You have to have somebody trained in this in anti-money laundering to execute the program. That's myself, and I have a staff that helps me do this. And then the other two boxes there, you'll see the all available information. That just to summarize that, it just means that we have to gather up all the information that's available to us to be able to file the required reports, whether it's and you'll learn about this, the suspicious activity report, or whether it's a cash transaction report. What we're going to focus on today is that middle box up in the top is training. Again, AML training of casino personnel, and casino in a general term also includes sports books, including training in the identification of unusual or suspicious transactions and activity. That's what we're going to be covering today, your responsibilities with respect to that as you get trained. Now, let me summarize this one as well. This is how the federal government defines suspicious. What's suspicious? So if I can just break it down, it's a transaction or a set of transactions of $5,000 or more that involves money from an illegal activity or is designed to evade a federal reporting requirements, and I'll cover that a little later on. Excuse me. Or has no business or apparent lawful purpose, and we'll give a definition to that, or involves the use of a sportsbook to facilitate criminal activity. And that sort of summarizes that. Okay, so if it meets one of these, any one of them, not all of them, just any one of them, then the activity is deemed suspicious and we have to report it to the federal government. Okay, now, when I say that, I'm talking about the Office of Lottery and Gaming. You don't have to. You'll learn that your responsibility is simply to report unusual activity to us, and then we'll investigate and handle the investigation on our end and determine whether we have to file a report with the federal government. So in a more simple terms, what is suspicious activity? Suspicious activity refers to behaviors or transactions which potentially relate to money laundering. And we'll give you some examples of what that looks like to give it context. The BSA violation, we'll cover that as well, terrorist financing or other related crimes. But remember, when we were looking at that definition earlier, it also said what? Suspicious activity also refers to behaviors or transactions that do not appear to have a business or lawful purpose. So we might ask, well, what is that? Well, let me give you an example. And by the way, every time I'm giving you an example, this is not something I've made up. This is an example I'm pulling from my years working in the casino or in casino-related industries, okay? So how about a player who lives in a low-income housing project that's paying $500 a month in rent? And then they come into the sports book every Tuesday and make a cash bet of at least $50,000. Think about that for a moment, right? Now, when the ticket writer who's giving them tickets asks them, hey, what do you do for a living? They say, I work for a living. So they're sort of evasive about what they do for a living, their occupation, right? So is this a crime? Hard to say what's a crime. Is it unusual? I would hope your answer is yes, it's unusual, because it is unusual, right? Yeah, why would somebody who's living in, looks like with modest means have this much cash come in and on a regular basis? So that's what, sometimes what we look at when we say it does not appear to have a business or lawful purpose, okay? All right, so the next one is, let's go through primary sources of AML investigations. So as I said earlier, you don't have to investigate, you just need to report what you see to us. But we also have other sources that here at the lottery we do to investigate cases of potential suspicion. One of them is Intralot. Intralot, as you may know, is our partner in sports betting. They are our contractor. They are the ones that will put the betting machines in your place establishment. They have the call center where you call if you have issues. But they also, because it's their sports betting platform, they have people in the background that are monitoring the activity that's going on, the betting activity, deposits, withdrawals, and they're monitoring it for suspicious activity. And so when they find unusual activity, they will refer it to us over at the OLG, and we'll conduct an investigation to make that determination of whether or not we have to file a SAR. Geolocation reports, I'm not going to go into that because that deals with really the mobile app and internet gaming, and you guys aren't involved in that, so no worries on that. Retailers identify potential suspicious activity. That is you. So you guys will be, retailers will be a source of investigations for us. Again, remember, you don't have to investigate, you just have to refer it to us, and we'll give you some information on where to refer it to. Okay. Internal OLG reports. And this is here at the Office of Lottery and Gaming. We monitor as well. We monitor the activity, the betting activity, the deposits, withdrawals, all that's going on. And we run reports to identify potential suspicious activity. And so we do that internally as well. Okay. Negative news reports. I always put this in there because there are many times that, unfortunately, that we get bad news about some of maybe our top players, and the negative news then keys us in that, oh, maybe what they're doing here is suspicious, and I'll give you some examples of that later. But we do monitor that. Okay, so what are the top areas of suspicious activity at sportsbooks? Source of funds. That is probably it is one of the two top ones, and this is illicit funds are used to bet. So the use of illicit funds, illegal funds to gamble is money laundering. It is a crime. It can be a crime. In this case, what we do here, this is what the OLG does, is we run reports to try to find that at our end, in the back end. We run reports to do that. You don't have to worry about it so much, but it could come up, and I've seen this come up, where a player will mention to you saying, hey, oh yeah, this is my money from some bankruptcy fraud that I did or something. And you might think that's unusual that somebody would say that, but oddly enough, people do say that sometimes. So this is what we look at sometimes. We try to find cases where the money that's being used to bet is from an illicit source. And I'll give you some examples of that a little later on. Messenger betting. This is something you may see because it happens at the retailers. And so what is messenger betting? It's really somebody who's betting with money that doesn't belong to them because it belongs to somebody else who's the real gambler, but maybe they don't want their name associated with it, or they're trying to hide themselves, and they're using somebody else, a straw person, to make the bets on their behalf. And so that messenger betting is something that is illegal because it does report in some false reporting to the federal government on who's actually gambling. Okay, so let me keep going, and I'll give you examples of all of these as we go along. I'm not going to cover all these down here because a lot of these minimal gaming, structuring, identity theft, and credit card fraud happen generally in the regular casino, but we have seen instances, where credit card fraud happens with us, but it happens on the mobile app, on the internet site that we have to bet. Okay, so let me give you some examples of source of funds. Okay, sorry about that. Okay, player wages in large amounts over a long period of time, and it's evasive. That's what they do for a living. So I've had cases where we had a person who was betting a long time, and the host could not get them to engage in conversation, which was a little unusual. But what we found out later, one of the reasons they weren't telling us what they did is they were a CPA. You say, well, what's wrong with that? Well, unfortunately, the CPA was indicted on embezzlement because he embezzled a couple of $1 million from a nonprofit organization over which he was the accountant. And that resulted in an indictment there. And then we figured out that that's what he was doing with the money that was embezzled. They were gambling. They were gambling with it. So I've had individuals. We had a priest one time. We found out he was out where the money was coming from. But that's what happens sometimes, and you may run across this. Other examples of where I've seen it: top players arrested for embezzlement of company funds. Remember, kind of that CPA example I just gave. Also, we had a top player who was indicted on drug trafficking charges. Remember earlier I said the unusual case about the guy living in a $500 a month apartment and then betting big? They were indicted on narcotics charges. And so we figured out where the money was coming from. And again, if it's illicit money and it's used to gamble like this in large amounts, it is generally called money laundering. Players' funds to place wagers are from marijuana-related business. And I know what you're thinking right now. You're thinking, wait a minute, marijuana is legal. And certainly it's legal in many states, but the federal government has yet to say it is legal. It's still illegal on the federal government side. And for that reason, we still have to treat it like an illegal narcotic or an illegal drug. So the money coming from that is illegal from a federal perspective. So, it's still considered a source of funds issue because of the nature of the money. Okay. So let's go over messenger betting and what are examples of that. Players on the phone taking orders on what to bet on and how much to bet. That's where we see it sometimes happening. And so we see many casinos that have sports books inside them. They will generally prohibit the use of the phone when they're in line to get into the in line to bet in person, or if they're in line to use the machines, or if they're just on their phone and they're up at the machine, they generally prohibit them to use that because that's generally it's somebody really, they're talking on the phone. Somebody is telling them bet this much on this game, on this spread, and so it's an indication of messenger betting. So you may see that at your establishment. Player with a winning ticket gives the ticket to another person to redeem the winnings. So remember, the person who won the ticket, they're the winner. They have the potential tax obligations if it's, because winnings from gaming are taxable. I won't get into the taxation aspects of it, but they are. And so, you can't have somebody then giving it to somebody else to do that. Sometimes we'll have people that will redeem tickets for the payouts for like a percentage of the payout. Sometimes 5%. I've heard of even 10%. Player has a friend. Player has a big winning, I should say, here, maybe over 600. Says, I will have a friend redeem the winnings at the lottery office. Well, let us know about that. Again, you can't have somebody win and then give the ticket to somebody else and have them redeem it. Unless they're truthful and tell us that they're redeeming it from another person and they give us all the information. So you've got to be careful. But these are examples of what messenger betting is and something you need to be aware of. Okay, this one, nothing complex here. I just wanted to clarify what the obligations of everybody are. Okay, so on the left where it says intralot and geolocation, the obligation there is to just report the activity to the Office of Lottery and Gaming. And where it says identification ID unusual activity, that is you at the retail location, and all you have to do is refer it to the Office of Lottery and Gaming. Okay. And you'll see in the middle of the green box, the OLGR responsibility is to conduct an investigation of the unusual activity to make a determination, is it suspicious? And you can see in the purple, if it's suspicious, then we file a SAR, okay? But I wanted to make those very distinct roles because I don't want you to think that you need to conduct an investigation. You don't. You see it, you report it. Okay, so suspicious activity reports. Let me give you a little bit of background on on these. And so let me first put these up. SARs are required to be filed with the Treasury Department. We've already gone over what, something is suspicious, it has to be filed, right? If the OLG determines that the activity requires a SAR filing, we have 30 days. So there is a deadline. We have 30 days from the date the suspicious activity is detected. So 60 days if we don't know who the person is, if we don't have identifying information. But you see, there is a time clock that's running on it, and you'll see how that comes into play with you. Okay, and what are they used for? Suspicious activity reports. They're used by law enforcement to supplement existing investigations, to initiate and or identify new criminal cases, and to identify potential terrorist activities. And more for FYI, when we say with the Treasury Department, what we're talking about and where the reports are filed, it's with the Financial Enforcement Network. It's a government agency. It's called FinCEN, and they administer the Bank Secrecy Act, the anti-money laundering laws and regulations. Okay, so the reports that are filed there, just to give you an idea, is they have a database of about 200 million reports that have been filed over the last 10 years. About 15 to 20 million are filed annually. It's a wide access system, that database, so that federal law enforcement, state police, regulators generally have access to this database to help them on existing or new investigations. Every day, there's about 30,000 inquiries into that system. And so that's a lot. So you can see it is a highly used system. So when we're saying that we file these reports with FinCEN, it's not like it's going into sort of a black box and never being seen the daylight again. No, those reports are being viewed and are used by law enforcement. 30,000 inquiries a day into that system. 10,000 users, law enforcement agencies, federal, state, local. That's a lot. And so it's important that these reports get filed because they do help investigators with criminal investigations and existing ones and new ones. Okay. So you saw the 30-day filing requirement. That's the deadline that we have. So because of that, if you, as a retailer, identifies potential suspicious activity, it has to be reported to us within 5 days of you becoming aware of the activity, because the clock starts ticking. That 30 days starts running. And so we need to have that information as soon as you identify it. Again, you don't have to investigate, you just have to report it. Okay, now I'm going to give you a little bit about unusual activity. Remember, I'm saying you just have to report stuff that's unusual. Doesn't have to meet that definition of suspicious, just unusual. And when you do that, here's things that you need to gather to report it to us. So before contacting us, you should get this information. What is it? The name of the person exhibiting the unusual activity. If you don't have it, then a physical description of the person. It could be, a white male, 6 foot tall, wearing a plaid shirt and jeans, a mustache, beard, whatever you have. You just write down the physical description of who they are. If you have video of the incident, and you should, and you might, actually you might and you should, is save it, because we're gonna, and tell us about it, because we're gonna come out and snip a copy of that video. The date and the time the activity was observed, okay, and the description of what occurred. Okay, so it could be, hey, I saw the person put in, more than 10,000 into the machines. When I asked them for ID, they refused to tell me what their name was. That's and so I don't have any ID for the person, and that would have triggered a currency transaction report, as you said earlier. Okay. So to report incidents, you just call us. There's our number. I'll give you this number again at the in-person training. You'll have this information again, but the OLG investigative stat. Okay. And somebody will, if we don't answer, just leave a message. We'll get back to you, and then and you can describe. But have this information available, because this is what we're going to ask you. Okay. So now let's move over to cash transactions. So cash transactions, and I say FinCEN there because that's where the cash transaction reports get filed. And this requirement, and I'll read the federal requirement there. When a cash transaction by an individual exceeds 10,000 in a single day, the OLG is required to file a currency transaction report with FinCEN. This requirement is no different than the requirement that your bank has. So you know that when you go to your bank and you push over 10,000 in cash over the window to deposit, they're gonna file a currency, a CTR with FinCEN. Whether they ask you for your name, address, social security number, because they probably already have that information, so they may not ask you, but they're going to do that. If they don't, they will ask you for it. We have the same requirement here, okay? And you notice there it says in a single gaming day. So you could have a situation where an individual walks into your place and let's say puts down 7,000 at 12 o'clock and then comes back at night and puts another 4,000 in. Now you're over 10,000, and then you have to file. You have to get some identifying information, and we'll go over that in a second right here. But I just wanted to make it clear that this is nothing, shouldn't be new to you because it is what the banks have already been doing. Okay. So here's the OLG requirement for tracking cash. If a player conducts cash transactions, inserts cash into the kiosk of $7,500 or more in a single day, retailer must record, among others, the following: player's name and address, player's ID, driver's license number, player's phone number and email, date of the transaction, whether it was a cash in or cash out. It's generally going to be a cash in, and you may wonder why the 7,500 is number is there. That's because remember, we have to start tracking their cash. So as I said earlier, what if the person comes in at 12 and puts in 7,000, or let's just say for the sake of argument, he puts in 7,500 and then comes back at the end of the day, maybe at 9 o'clock p.m. and puts another 4,000 in. That's why you have to track how much they put into you. And it's not going to be a big issue until they put in 7,500 and then you start tracking it. Okay, we'll give you instructions on how to do that with some paperwork along with it when you come to the in-person training. So when you're at the in-person training, you will receive a report with instructions on how to record these cash transactions. They're very important because we are required to file those cash transaction reports with FinCEN. Okay. Let me go over some scenarios, some cash transaction scenarios that I want you to be aware of. The player questions why you must provide, because the first thing that will happen is you go up to a player, right? And you've already known, you get an idea that they're putting in large amounts of cash in there. So you go up and you approach them and he says, hey, can I get your ID or your name? They're going to say, why? Just advise the player that's required by law and the OLG, the lottery. And that's why that's why you're asking. Okay, it's not because you want to know, it's because you're required to ask. The player then refuses to provide the identification. Again, get a physical description of the player, the height, weight, gender, age, hair color, and notify us. Because remember, you still have the camera, and so you probably have them on camera, and so we can get an idea, see if we spot the person elsewhere. What not to do is do not get into a confrontation with the player over an identification issue. I can tell you I've had some experience here with GambetDC. We've had both. We've had some players have basically walked out when they refused to provide the ID, and they had put in like over 10,000 into the machines. And then we had another one who said it was perfectly fine and said, okay, that's fine, I understand, and gave their ID to the retailer, and they made a photocopy of their ID. And so you can, you won't always get resistance. Some people know about this, especially if they're experienced players at the casinos. They know about the cash transaction reporting. Okay. So now we're going to switch over to unauthorized disclosures, another very important topic. Information provided to the OLG of potential suspicious activity is sensitive and confidential and must not be disclosed to anyone except OLG authorized personnel. Who are authorized personnel? There are investigators. That phone number I gave earlier, that's to our investigators. It does not include your sales representative or contact or sales coordinator. It does not include them. So don't give that information to them. Only give it to our OLG investigators, okay? And at the end of this presentation, I will give you my email. I give you my email, but if it's sensitive, I'd rather not have it emailed to me. But you can email me, tell me you have information, and we'll contact you. Okay. All right, so I'm going to go now over what happens, the seriousness of having an anti-money laundering program. And I'm going to go over a case that happened in October of 2016. There's been others, but this one was particularly egregious. Cantor Gaming was a big operator, a sports book operator in Nevada. And in 2014, they actually had over 30% of basically the entire sports wagering market in Nevada. They were fined over $20 million and were criminally prosecuted. What happened? Here is what happened. They knew that the customers that were placing the bets were placing bets with money belonging to third parties. Well, who were the third parties? The third parties were organized and some organized criminal organizations that got money from extortion, from narcotics trafficking, from other illicit activities. So remember going back to what we said money laundering was, if the source of the money used to bet is from illegal activity, it's money laundering. They knew the customers were placing bets with these from these third parties. They did nothing, and they also knew that the money was from these illicit sources. They did nothing. They failed to investigate the source of the money used to the blades. I mean, even in the face of sort of knowing who the money belonged to, they still failed to investigate. They failed to file suspicious activity reports until the IRS examiner raised the issue. I didn't talk about the IRS earlier, but in the casino industry, the IRS is the auditor for anti-money laundering. I know they perform a tax funding. We're talking about the IRS, but they have a separate whole division that doesn't do tax audits, that they do anti-money laundering audits of casinos and other industries as well. Okay, they failed to perform adequate independent testing, and they failed to provide appropriate AML training to their employees. That's why all of this came down. They were criminally prosecuted. Some of their executives went to prison, and they ended up declaring bankruptcy. The company basically imploded and was sold off to other gaming companies. So it no longer exists. So it's a big penalty. Bad things can happen if you don't do an appropriate AML program. So with that, I am done, and I just want to let you know, if you have any questions, please contact me, and there's my email address. Email's the best. Just email me, and if you want with your questions, or if you want to talk, just give me a phone number. Or if you want to report any potential suspicious activity, you could send it here, email me here. And again, don't put sensitive information in the email. Just tell me that you want to report something, and then we'll reach back out to you and get the information, okay? So that is it with the presentation. I wish you all success in your new endeavor, and wish you well. Thank you. Thank you very much. Stop recording, sharing, and I will stop the recording.